the opportunity to be here and speak with you. I do want to apologize. We did have a PowerPoint presentation, but we're having some technical difficulties, and so instead you get to look at me for the next hour or so, or probably less than that, since it's just going to be verbal. So I apologize if it appears that I'm reading a whole bunch. I have the slides on paper here, so I want to make sure I try and convey as much of the information as possible to you, just so that you can get a good sense of what we're proposing with this update to the Rural Lands Plan. The Rural Lands Plan is one of the chapters in our comprehensive plan, and the county's comprehensive plan is the county's vision for its future, what it wants to be. And so it's essentially the guiding document that we use when evaluating future land use proposals in the county. The overall intent of this chapter is to look to protect the county's rural character while growing its rural and agricultural economy to better serve the county's people and protect its heritage. And there's some pretty lofty goals there, but I think that they're very important when you consider how much of the county is considered rural. It's all of the lands that are outside of our service districts and outside of our villages. And so it's a significant portion of the county that this section of the comprehensive plan will be used to guide future development and future growth in the county. I say growth, it's controlled. We're not advocating for significant growth there. We want to preserve what makes Fauquier so special in those parts. So we broke it down essentially into 4 key concepts that we're emphasizing within this chapter. The first is to look to enhance the farm economy. The second is to protect the rural character, the environmental, cultural, and visual resources that we have in the rural lands. Third is to maintain strict controls over new development in rural areas. And the fourth and final one is to support appropriate tourism while minimizing impact. And that's looking at tourism through agritourism, ecotourism, and heritage tourism. So looking at 3 different facets of tourism that we could see in the rural lands. The first section to look to enhance the farm economy. We have a fairly robust farm economy. In the state of Virginia, Fauquier County is number 5th in terms of dairy production, number 8 in terms of beef production, and 36th among the localities in terms of the overall economic impact from the agricultural sector. 54% of our county is actually in active farmland right now. 82% of those are family-owned farms, and so those are trends that we want to see to continue and be enhanced as we move forward into the future. So the ways that we're looking to enhance the farm economy is to continue active support by providing agricultural assistance, community education, marketing strategies, and other programs. We want to look to support the preservation of the rural land base for agricultural uses through land use taxation programs, the purchase of development rights programs, conservation easements, sliding scale zoning, as well as the use of non-common open space easements. We want to utilize the homegrown logo branding and implement signage on farms that are utilizing this to help build awareness of Fauquier as an agricultural center and of the agricultural production within the county. We want to continue the education and training programs that are presently available through the Fauquier Education Farm, and finally continue to promote the FarmLink program. And looking at the farms themselves, we want to try and encourage on-farm value-added activities. And so looking to try and increase and allow a number of on-farm uses on working farms to help increase the value of the product that's created there. We want to look to try and streamline the permit and approval process and provide some support in application filing. What we hear a number of times from our farming community is just that the application process to do various forms of development is too onerous and is complicated and outside the realm of what they're familiar with, and so looking for some assistance, and so we're looking to try and find ways to be able to provide that. And we also want to look to try and promote direct marketing efforts to help increase the awareness of the product within the county. One of the other things that we want to look at is the wayside stands, finding ways to evaluate the current zoning that limits wayside stands and allow farmers to be able to more easily sell the produce that they are producing on their farms. Give them the opportunities to do that. Regarding equipment and services, we want to try and encourage businesses such as equipment sales, rental and repair, veterinary service, and product storage. Right now we're seeing a lot of those services and those value-added activities being located outside of the county, and so the raw produce is produced here, but then a lot of the value-added is actually taking place elsewhere in other localities, and they're reaping the benefits of that. And so if we're more able to maintain those benefits within the county, we think that benefits everybody. So other things that we want to do is look to promote cooperative infrastructure such as cold storage, processing equipment co-ops, meat and produce processing, all of the standards to make sure that these are appropriate and not having adverse impacts on any of the neighboring lands. Excuse me. So again, part of the other things we want to do is look to try and encourage aggregation facilities where we're able to have a number of these farms come together with their produce and share some of the costs to help drive them down, take advantage of the economies of scale for the production of their goods. We also want to support the equine and other animal activities that we have in the county, because Fauquier County actually ranks third in Virginia in terms of revenue that's streaming from horses. So we want to try and support strong equine and animal related activities. One of the ways that we're doing that is actually partnering with Loudoun County to look to encourage the location of a quarantine facility at Dulles Airport. This would only be the third one that's located on the eastern seaboard of the United States, and so we see a great boost in terms of the availability and opportunities for horse-related events if that were to go through. One of the other things that we want to look at is transportation and the movement of farm equipment, and trying to help to facilitate the safe movement of farm equipment on our rural roads. We recognize that the farming community certainly needs to be able to move that equipment from one property to another. And so we want to try and find ways to help to do that safely and not adversely impact our other drivers who are on those roads, which in some cases are fairly small and narrow. So looking to provide opportunities for pull-offs, other opportunities to safely move the equipment. The next section that we want to look at is to help to protect the environmental, cultural, and visual resources. One of the key things is the view sheds within the county. There's so many spectacular ones, and we want to try and ensure that we preserve those and don't see adverse impacts from future development that occurs. One of the ways that we're able to do that is using technology. We've developed GIS technology using mapping to be able to do some of these view shed analyses and be able to identify what points are visible from other points, essentially. And so be able to estimate the impact of new development, things like cell towers, which with their heights can be visible from long distances, but even other types of new structures that are going in, and be able to demonstrate where they'd be visible from, what sort of mitigation strategies could be utilized to lessen or even completely alleviate those impacts. And so this way, we hopefully can help to maintain the scenic quality and the traditional form and settlement patterns in the county. Regarding the historic resource, we want to look to continue to inventory our historic resources. Fauquier County has one of the most robust historic districts within the entire state of Virginia. We actually have the most of them located here, and so we want to try and protect those. We want to evaluate what the defining characteristics of each rural historic district is, and explore the site planning design that's going to go on in there to try and ensure that they don't adversely impact the culture and the heritage of those sites. Looking at water resources and groundwater protection, again, we want to continue to support efforts to improve the water quality that we have in our streams, monitor the impact of the groundwater withdrawals and aquifer recharge. Increasingly, we want to look to support best management practices around our wellheads and water sources. This is going to become increasingly important, and I know you guys know it well up here, the issues that we have in the county in certain locations in terms of getting water. And so we want to try and make sure that the water that is available is of the highest quality, because it adds significant expense and difficulty when not only to find the water, but then to make sure that the water is of a suitable quality for drinkability and usability. So increasingly we want to locate these in areas that are outside of the service districts, outside of the areas where there's increased potential contaminants, and make sure that the water, the areas that are draining to those are protected so that there's minimal contaminants that are getting into the waters. Other ways that we're looking to increase the availability of water is to try and support rainwater harvesting, increasingly capture the water that's coming down off the rooftops and things like that, and find uses for that to increase our availability. And in the future, also to look to identify opportunities for impounded water, things like dams, maybe a way to go to help to increase the water supply that we have at our disposal. Looking at the septic and wastewater management, we want to continue to evaluate the impacts of alternative treatment systems on groundwater quality to ensure that they're allow development to occur but not to adversely impact the groundwater. We want to encourage the development of communal systems in certain cases where there are issues of failing systems, such as what is taking place in Catlett and Calverton, where the soils are such that we have a number of failing systems there. And so looking to, in that instance, have a community system that would come in and alleviate those concerns. We also want to continue to evaluate the linkages between impaired streams and failing systems to prioritize where these alternative systems may be most appropriate and most beneficial to address the water quality issues. Another environmental impact that we want to look at is dark sky compliance and dark sky lighting to help preserve the dark skies and the ability to see the stars and reduce any of the light pollution that we have. And so we want to try and support and strengthen the standards that we have regarding lighting on properties to try and ensure that lights are downlit, that they have shields across the top. I don't know how many of you have driven down 29 just after you cross into Culpeper, the greenhouse that's on the west-hand side there. It lights up the sky, and so that's one of the things we want to help to avoid in our community here, and just be able to enjoy the stars at night. The next section we want to focus on is maintaining those strict controls over new development in the rural areas. Again, what attracts many people, what many people define as the most important characteristics is the rural character of Fauquier County. And so we've had a long-standing practice of trying to channel the growth and development into our service districts so that we are able to protect our rural lands and keep them as rural. So we want to maintain our sliding scale density and our non-common open space, which are some of our zoning tools that we use to limit the development potential that can occur in the rural lands. And in this way also to use hydrogeologic testing to help protect the character, integrity, and agricultural potential of the land. We want to look to try and develop standards for design and layout of non-common open space. When these subdivisions do occur, there's the requirement for easements on some of the land for non-common open space. Ideally, we want to see these large tracts of land that are going to be preserved, be contiguous to one another for benefits to wildlife or wildlife habitats, migration corridors. Also, just to be able to preserve that large landmass of undeveloped land that helps to enhance the character so much. We've also done some analysis of our rural tourism and the businesses that are located here. We've looked at the location of wineries in the county. We've done some hotspot analysis using sort of mathematical tools and spatial analysis to look and see where we have these. As you well know from anecdotal evidence, most of our wineries tend to be clustered in the northern part of the county. But we do have a number of agricultural and rural businesses that are located throughout the county. We see a lot more of the CSAs and those sorts of agricultural uses in the southern part. And so we've tried to map these out and figure out where they are, just to be able to leverage those in the future, because there's great benefit in locating them in similar areas, but also wanting to make sure that the impacts from them locating in proximity to one another are not too significant. So, as we're looking at these tourism, we want to support the appropriate tourism while minimizing the impacts. So the historic, cultural, natural, resource-based tourism, again, we're looking to encourage those. We want to support the wine trail, farm tours, interpretive battlefield sites, and similar opportunities. But we want to make sure that the rural tourism opportunities in particular are supporting activities that derive value from the resources on the property, the historic structure, agriculture. They're not simply being plopped down there because that is a location that's available. We want them to be specific to that location to take advantage of that location itself and the benefits that it offers. We want to make sure that those tourism activities are of an appropriate size and consider the infrastructure of the rural area and not obstruct the use of significant features. So, for example, if we do have a number of these wineries, ideally we don't want multiple large wineries located on the same rural road, which is going to cause adverse impacts in terms of traffic. There's safety concerns then from just the volume that the road is not really designed to handle. The event facilities themselves should enhance the historic and agricultural nature of the county and make sure that they're contributing to their preservation and enhancement. One of the things we also want to do is to review our existing regulations to minimize the impediments to these agritourism businesses and their impacts, while protecting and mitigating their impacts on adjoining properties and community. Again, we want to see our rural communities thrive, and so want to find ways to make sure that they can do that with the least regulation possible, but still protect their neighbors from any adverse impacts. One of the other ways we're considering to do this is potentially allowing larger farm markets through a special exception process, which would be a public hearing process before the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors. But trying to ensure that we're maintaining a focus on locally produced products. So again, trying to make sure that the emphasis there are on the products that are actually generated on that property, on that site, and not being brought in from another location. We want to try and limit the agritourism enterprises to operating farms with a defined minimum land cultivation. So more than just an acre on a 50-acre tract, and they say they're producing. We want to make it really a working endeavor that's been having that facility on it. Looking at the ecotourism aspect, we want to try and identify the potential assets that we have to be developed to support the ecotourism area in the county. One of the things we're really excited about is recently some land was donated to the county along the Rappahannock River. And so the county is looking to put in some access to the river so it would allow kayaking, canoeing, those sorts of things, and people to actually access the Rappahannock within our county. It's one of the things that we think has tremendous potential in the future, just to be able to increase the exposure of that tremendous natural resource to more residents. So the other part is looking to partner with state and federal lands to try and create some more opportunities for these sorts of things, with things like the Appalachian Trail. And so we can look to have some of these ecologically sound tourism opportunities located within our county. Again, in many ways, the benefit of those is that we have folks coming in from outside, coming to spend their money without being a tremendous drain on the resources of the county, in terms of not requiring school seats for their children, not requiring much in the way of fire and safety, rescue, those sorts of things. So in many ways, it's a tremendous boon to our local economy and helping the tax base by having these industries. Looking at heritage tourism, one of the things we want to try and do is continue to encourage the adaptive reuse of historic structures in appropriate locations. So this could be meaning reusing existing homes, existing buildings for different types of cottage industries, artists or craftsmen residences, those sorts of things. Again, trying to preserve those structures that are so intrinsic to the rural countryside, but finding new uses for them if they may no longer be viable as home sites. So we also want to try and build relationships with different agencies to help support these heritage and cultural tourism opportunities in the county. Where appropriate, we want to look to try and encourage some of these rural hospitality businesses, such as bed and breakfasts, country inns of limited size and scale, that really help to preserve the rural character, minimize the impacts, but open up the countryside for accessibility to those wanting to visit it. Looking at wineries, breweries, distilleries, and cideries, we're looking to try and encourage those and support them as part of the rural economy, trying to encourage them with agricultural support activities. We want to make sure that they're truly compatible with the local farm economy and where they're located and situated to make sure that they're successful. Again, as we discussed, we want to make sure that the infrastructure is appropriate to support them. So again, not locating multiples in close proximity to each other where there may be the infrastructure concerns. We also want to try and look to develop consistent regulations for all forms of alcohol-related events. Right now we have one set of rules for the wineries, but they're not quite uniform across all the different types of events and locations that there could be. So we want to try and make sure that they are fair and equal. Finally, the other types of rural businesses is that we feel that sort of general commercial uses should be directed to the towns and service districts and not be located in the rural lands. It should only be those that are focused in deriving their value, deriving their goods from the rural lands themselves that should be located there. We do want to try and continue to support the expansion of broadband while minimizing the impacts of cell towers, the visual impacts in particular. Again, increasingly, there are trends for education, for telemedicine, that the provision of broadband is becoming a necessity for, as opposed to simply a luxury. And so wanting to try and provide that and advocate for that while minimizing their impact, particularly from a visual perspective. We want to continue to promote the county's enterprise centers for fledgling home businesses, provide opportunities for them to start out there and then hopefully grow and expand in the county. For where they have contractor and vehicle-oriented home businesses, minimize their visual and other impacts on the neighboring community. And finally, look to consider small-scale supportive uses within our villages and in some cases service districts, such as country stores, small business offices, daycares and plumbing. So again, they're not out in the rural lands, they're in some of the slightly more settled areas, as our defined villages are, and certainly within our service districts. So the goal of all of this is to try and bring about the vision that we have for the rural lands, which is that Fauquier County honors and protects its natural and cultural resources, agricultural heritage, and rural landscape, while building a sustainable rural economy. So what we're doing with this is a chapter of the comprehensive plan. It's one of a number of chapters that we have focusing on this particular area. We've had a number of work sessions with the Planning Commission. We're anticipating that it goes before them for planning, for public hearing next month. So if there are aspects that you wanted to speak on, you would have the opportunity to come and speak to them. The full document will be available approximately a week before that. I can certainly get it to you beforehand if you would like to do so. And I apologize for the lack of any visual aids to go along with this, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. Yeah.
I saw a November 2012 article in Fauquier Now, and it was stating that, I'm just wondering, is this the basis for the vision? It's a 1972 trip to England influenced the planning here. Is that where the service districts came from and this kind of vision?
The service districts actually even predated that. From the very first comprehensive plan, the county, I think, prudently identified the service district concept of the way that they wanted to see future development here. That one, I think, identified to some extent the village plan and the identification of these other smaller areas outside the service districts where they recognized there was a clustering of development and that these small communities could help serve the larger rural community. And so sort of essentially deeming it appropriate to see a slightly more intense scale of development there than what you see throughout the majority of the rural lands.
So when actually did the service districts become in place?
They've been there from the county's very first comprehensive plan in the 1960s. The shape and scope of them have changed certainly over time. Initially, the county was envisioning itself to grow into a new Fairfax. It was projecting population base well above 200,000 by now. So as we can see, that vision and that idea of what we want it to be has certainly changed over time. And it continues to evolve. Just last year with the update to the Catlett, Calverton, and Midland plans, Calverton was actually changed from a service district down to a village, recognizing just the limited growth and development potential there, especially in light of the sewer capacity constraints that they have. So the comprehensive plan is intended to be a living, evolving document that can change as the community's vision for itself and for its future changes. Sure.
Is the,
So I'll go there and then come back to you.
Can you comment on the continued pressure to develop, pressure from the outside to develop?
It's certainly there, and I don't think it's ever going to go away. And that's why the adherence to the service district concept is so important, and that sliding scale zoning, in particular in the rural lands, because what that essentially does with that sliding scale is, for one, it limits the number of properties a parcel can be divided into, but it also helps to ensure that a large chunk of it, 85% of it, remains in one particular parcel, and that's that non-common open space that we were talking about. So you can see the small clusters of homes that come off of a property, but the vast majority that's going to remain intact as one large piece that has to remain that way. But as I said, the development pressure is not going to go away. What we're seeing and what we're working towards is potentially increasing the density within our service districts, trying to channel the growth there, because in many ways that's where the county is able to most effectively, most efficiently provide services, be it fire and rescue services, be it school services. Ultimately, and I know it's a sore point, Marshall, but things like water and sewer services as well. Being able to congregate and cluster the population makes it much more efficient and effective to provide those services.
is the entire comprehensive plan being revised or just part of it?
At this time, just this chapter. The Code of Virginia requires that a locality consider their comprehensive plan every 5 years. The way we've handled it in Fauquier is essentially to look at it chapter by chapter and update those on a continuous rolling basis, essentially. So that way we're constantly evaluating and tweaking aspects as they need updating and changing.
And so once the the revision is adopted, does that then in turn mandate changes to zoning laws?
It could, it wouldn't mandate them, but it's certainly part of the implementation action of these would be to consider certain aspects of the zoning ordinance, bring them up for review, and look to possibly change them. Again, the comprehensive plan itself is not a regulatory document, it's a guiding document, and so we use it as our starting point for things, and it lays out that vision. And so again, it can lay the groundwork for amending the ordinances where appropriate.
How big a change is this from the existing chapter?
That's a tricky question in that, in terms of the way it's written, it's essentially a complete rewrite. In terms of a lot of the policies and the core policies, it's not really a significant change from where we are now. It provides a little bit more guidance on a number of these things, particularly with regard to the rural economy, in terms of scope and scale and the levels of appropriateness. But in terms of the county's direction and how it wants to see the rural lands develop or not develop or be preserved, it's very consistent with what we have right now. Back and I'll come to you.
Can you talk more about view sheds and who determines what view sheds should be protected and what that means for the area?
Sure. I mean, obviously, view sheds are a very subjective matter, and we recognize that. So what we wanted to do was to be able to, we reached out to our planning commission and to our architectural review board initially to try and ask them to just help us identify what they thought of as some key view sheds in the county. And so we've gone ahead and highlighted those within this, recognizing that that's not a comprehensive list by any means. One of the things that we're able to do, as I said, with the new technologies, when we get development proposals in, is to be able to enter the heights and the location of those developments, and essentially work backwards from there and identify where those are going to be visible from. So certainly things like our scenic byways, we're going to be very considerate of what development's going in locations that are visible from there. Trying to make sure, not necessarily to prohibit the development, but to make sure that the development is appropriate and architecturally designed so that it's going to fit into that character and countryside that exists right now.
First, thank you for coming. This has been very helpful. Is your presentation available online or in some written form?
I can certainly look to get you this presentation because, as I said, I recognize there's a whole lot of maps and images in here that
There's
would
a lot
be useful.
there for you to digest, especially since we haven't had dinner. But it would be helpful if it could be,
Sure.
could be made available.
If I can just coordinate with you to distribute, either to get it for you or I can get you a link if we're able to, we can potentially put it up on our website.
Definitely, we could,
And following up on Mike's question, when the amendments are proposed, will there be an analysis of this is the way it is, this is the way we propose to change that specifically?
I don't think we're gonna do a direct comparison to what is existing right now, just because again, we have done a complete rewrite of it. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one. How we looked at it presently is under different categories, different description, different section headings and things like that. So I don't think you have so many red lines and arrows going this way and this way.
I don't mean that, but there must be, say a dozen things that you all know you're recommending changes.
Mm-hmm.
And would those be identified so that we don't have to go back and
cheat
digest
sheet
the
version of
first
what the
one
changes are?
and then digest the amendments?
We have not proposed that.
I think that might be helpful.
What we are doing, and in a way that may help to that, is we're proposing, take a step back, 4 years ago, or 4.5 years ago when I started, one of the first things that we redid was the introduction to the comprehensive plan, in which we laid out a framework that we were looking to structure it, so that everything and all the objectives that were in the individual chapters could tie back to the county's vision as a whole for the entire county. And so one of the things that we're doing in here is we're gonna have specific sections in these of goals, objectives, and implementation actions. And those, I think, are essentially gonna be the key aspects to pull out of this that we can potentially look to highlight how they differ from the existing one. Because those are the actual meat of what's being recommended from this chapter. The narrative portions help, and they help lay the groundwork to it, but they don't have the same sort of core impact that these other sections, these goals, objectives, and implementation do. And that's a little bit of change from where we are at right now, where those aren't as overt within the chapter. It's more of a narrative description of those that are interwoven and not as specifically called out. So, you know, as we get to those, I can potentially look to try and highlight which of those represent something new versus a continuation from the existing.
Finally, you mentioned water. Recently, I think we've all become more sensitive to water. Water's a showstopper. If there's any water, we're not gonna be able to do a lot of things.
Right.
Or if, in the case of Marshall, the water is suspect, it's gonna restrict anything. But I have the impression that we really don't know a heck of a lot about water capacity, where it is, how much it is.
That's one of the things we're working on. We're currently in the middle, I think this is actually the second or third year of a 5-year collaboration with the USGS that we're doing to try and analyze and ascertain where the water is in the county, to have a better idea, to be able to look to drill our future wells and identify the water to provide our service districts.
But that would be an essential element.
Absolutely.
Any planning, business districts, rural, whatever.
I mean, the concept of service districts don't really work if you're not able to provide services.
So if you find wells, if they're on private property, if you find sources of water, how does the county deal with that? How does that work?
It depends to the extent that the county is looking to obtain the water in those areas. Conceivably, the first and foremost, the ideal solution would be able to reach an agreement with the property owner for the county or the WSA to acquire the rights to that water and to be able to access it. It depends in every situation as to the level of need. If you're able to tap into water on one property, you may be able to tap into the same aquifer from another location as well. But it ends up being a collaborative process to try and find those, and then for the county to be able to gain control of them to serve the citizens.
Is the county doing anything as far as reservoirs for water supply?
That's one of the things that a number of years ago the county decided to move away from those and to focus solely on groundwater. There's a movement now to consider moving back towards potentially having dams and reservoirs, just with the recognition of at times the fragility of supply of being solely reliant on groundwater, and so being able to have a little bit more control ultimately. It'll take time. Designation of where those reservoirs might be in the land involved is a significant undertaking as well.
I have a question. When you were talking about like if